Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 40. What can death teach us about disaster recovery? So, disaster recovery, disasters, getting hacked, having a server crash, having your software just stop. These are all things that are going to happen to you, just like death. There are few things that are certain in life, but death and taxes. And I'm going to focus on the brighter of the two. Death! Hooray! Anyways, so when you are planning for a disaster scenario, when you're looking at disaster scenario, it is something that you have to just kind of accept. You will get hacked. You will have a disaster. It will happen. The best plans always fail. A prime example of this is this past weekend, Friday. What is this? Friday the 19th, July 19th, 2024. There was a global catastrophe. CrowdStrike, a enhanced detection response platform, antivirus platform, pushed a bunk update through their content through their content templates, which caused some sort of logical memory leak, which then caused every Windows device that got the update to then begin to blue screen endlessly. The only way to fix it was to boot the device into safe mode, delete the offending file, and then things would operate normally. So this was a huge deal because it took a lot of things offline. It completely killed the European economy in the middle of their stock trading day. It stopped all air travel across the globe. It had a significant impact. And the entire reason for this was because this vendor, this company, pushed a bunk update. And these are things that are going to happen. It doesn't matter who you are. It's going to happen to every single one of us. And so you have to plan for scenarios like this. You have to plan for how you're going to recover. In my own company, we ended up having every one of our hosts affected and every single one of our servers affected. And while this wasn't a huge problem, because we could recover, for a lot of folks, that's a significant lift. We had disaster recovery plans in place where we could quickly respond, and we got everybody back up and running before 7 o'clock. And so the only remaining problems were probably about 20% of the workstations needed to have the remediation done on them. And that was it. Like, we responded and we got everything back up and running. But that's because we planned appropriately. And so if you don't plan appropriately, just like with the death of a loved one, if you don't plan appropriately, the recovery from that is going to be excruciating and very hard to do. So what makes a good disaster recovery plan? What makes a good incident response plan? What makes a good response? How do you craft your team like this? These are all really good questions. But a good disaster recovery plan doesn't plan for a single instance. Meaning, you're not preparing a recovery plan for ransomware. You're not creating a recovery plan for if the power goes out. You're creating a recovery plan based on the key pieces of your information. You, as a part of your disaster recovery plan and your disaster recovery initiative, you should be doing what is called a business continuity. You should have a business continuity plan. And this plan basically just states, this is how long our business can suffer under these circumstances, and this is how long we expect it to take for us to return to operations. But in the business continuity plan, you list what your primary functions of your business are and how important they are to what criticality they are to your business. And so if you have certain pieces like let's say you have a phone system in your company, but your company doesn't actually do any business over the phone. It's just something that sort of facilitates business, makes things easier. While that's probably a critical system when you think about it, hey, if our phones are down, it really makes things a lot more difficult. But if the phones are down, our business can still operate. You wouldn't treat that with the same criticality as, oh, well, our software, our back-end software for our systems is completely down, meaning nobody can do any work and we can't make any money. So you want to, when you're doing when you're doing a disaster recovery plan, you should also have a business continuity plan sort of in mind, in place, and being processed at the same time. So that way you know what to focus on. When you're building your disaster recovery plan, you should be focused on mission critical aspects and not necessarily planning for a specific instance where that affects devices. So planning for ransomware is a bad idea because you don't know how the ransomware is going to be implemented. You don't know anything about how the attackers got in. You don't know anything about that. So you can't really plan for any of that information. But what you can plan for is our servers are offline. For whatever reason, our servers are offline. This server is offline. This server is offline. And you plan for that type of detail. You plan for service outages. You plan for vendor outages. You plan for all of these things individually so that your business can remain solvent. And so what you focus on is, again, it's incumbent upon having that business continuity plan in place, or at least skeletoned, so that you can identify what your critical pieces are. Now, from there, when you are creating a disaster recovery plan, what you need to do is you need to make sure there are clear lines of communication. When you have somebody who is passing, when you have a loved one that is passing, it is really a great idea for them to have created a will, for them to have identified an executor, a power of attorney, and somebody who is in charge of making medical decisions. So these can all be the same people, and these can be individual people scattered across who they feel is best suited for which task. But it is a good idea to have all of those things in place before it becomes necessary to act on it. Because otherwise you end up in situations where people aren't really sure where an inheritance is going to go, or how to deal with the funeral or death rights or whatever. And it becomes a mess, and it can be really, really hard for families to deal with. Just like in a business, if you don't have clear lines of communication in your disaster recovery plan, it's going to be really difficult for you to identify who's doing what and where. And the best way to implement this that I've found is to create teams. And these teams are typically created with different skill levels of your company. In your disaster recovery plan, you should have certain teams that are identified to do specific things, such as a communications team. This team is the communications team. This team is the only team that is allowed to talk to anybody outside of the company, or you have two teams, one that's specifically outside individuals, media, regulatory, so on and so forth. That's one team, and then you have another team that's specifically designed to communicate to customers, and you split that responsibility up into teams. And then you have another team that's responsible for investigation work. So how did they get in? How can we make sure this is going on? And this is an important one that every disaster recovery plan should have, is an investigative team, is somebody who's going in and looking to see what's going on so you can prevent further compromise. But then you have a recovery team, the team that is actually doing the work to get the business back online and back in an operation standpoint. Now, if your company is like mine and you don't have that many people to establish into different teams, multiple people can wear multiple hats in teams. You just have to make sure that there are capabilities and priorities attached to those teams. For instance, you would want somebody who is assigned to both the communications team and the recovery team to know that their priority is to the recovery team. And so if there is an instance where there's a conflict, the recovery, that's what comes first. And so you establish those priorities in your disaster recovery plan. Now, in your disaster recovery plan, you should call out specific instances that you believe are more likely to occur. So it is a good thought process to walk through a ransomware scenario, but this is akin to just doing a tabletop. You walk through these tabletops and you test your disaster recovery plan through a logical process where you pretend things are going on. These are all things that come into play. And all tie in together. The disaster recovery plan and a good tabletop will help spot problems in that disaster recovery plan, and your incident response plan can help identify individual instances where an incident may not have been accounted for. So when you are building your disaster recovery plan, you should also have an incident response plan that specifically identifies those instances that are most likely to happen, most likely to occur, and a rough outline of the ideas of how that's going to be remediated. And the way we do this is by identifying key pieces of the infrastructure and building out a recovery or return to operations plan based on those pieces. So, for instance, if you have a password manager that you host inside of your own environment, if that goes down, everybody loses their passwords, and so it is vital for that to kind of stay up. But if you're in the midst of a recovery and you don't have that password manager up, how are you going to do anything within your own environment? You need to plan for that. And so certain things like backing that up to an alternative cloud and having some sort of dead switch, so where if the heartbeat to the current password manager, to the on-premises password manager dies, then the cloud version of the password manager kicks on, and you can then access your passwords through the alternative means. And these are all things that you can plan for and do and create. And some of them are expensive, some of them are free. It kind of depends on your environment, and you're going to have to do that work to discover. But there are aspects that you can plan to make sure it costs you less in the future. Again, a lot of this is just planning just in case. You are going to have a scenario where you have been hit by a hacker, where you're facing a disaster. A comet has come in and crashed the data center. Spurious communications from space have corrupted your server. These are all things that can and will happen to you and your organization, and you need to be able to plan for when your systems go down. So, and it's just like that with death. You must plan. You must have a will. You've got to have some sort of idea of what's going to happen when you die. Who's going to take care of your kids? Who's going to take care of your dog? Who the fuck is going to sell your house? That sort of thing. Who gets the money from your piggy bank? Shit, I don't know. You guys come up with crazy shit all the time, and that is the point. If you don't have these things planned out beforehand, it can become messy in the end. And so, one of the things that you want to keep in mind as you go through all of this is that nobody gets this right. Nobody gets it perfect. There's always going to be an issue where after a disaster recovery plan, you're going to be like, we could have done that better. And that is why it is important to have a meeting afterwards with your key personnel that says something akin to, what did we learn? Or a debrief. You need to have something where you're like, okay, what happened during this recovery process? Where did we run into pitfalls? What can we improve? And that will help you identify key pieces where you may be lacking. And one of the things that you will see with disasters and recovery scenarios is you will see good IT departments versus bad IT departments. And maybe that's not even fair. Maybe it's better to say better prepared IT departments versus not prepared IT departments. And so, for instance, Delta, it has been more than a week now since the CrowdStrike incident that we now call CrashStrike. It's been more than a week since that incident, and Delta is still working on trying to get their systems up. And not to call them out, and not to tell anybody that Delta is a bad company, but it's obvious that their IT department did not have the proper plans in place for this specific type of disaster scenario. They lost the game. They did not have things properly set. They did not have proper lines of communication. They did not have proper plans for how to get from a failed state to a working state. And that's kind of scary. But you see this all the time with other organizations as well. Like I said, you had the CrowdStrike incident affected nearly every airline across the planet. And so Delta, and we'll use, we'll use Southwest as an example. Delta still down. Southwest came back up same day. Maybe their IT departments are the same. Now, that might not be fair. Their infrastructure might be entirely different, and one may only use CrowdStrike in a very limited fashion, and the other might use it totally everywhere. But we don't know that. But what we can say is that there are other organizations where we can point to. For instance, the city of Dallas got hacked last year, and the city of Dallas was down for more than a month because they did not properly plan for what would happen if their backups got compromised, because they did not isolate or have any sort of off-site backup repository to prevent the attackers from gaining access and completely fucking them. And that is where you see issues. On the flip side of that, Monroe County, Indiana had been hacked and had been recovered within a week. And that is still a significant amount of downtime, but compared to a month, that is a huge, that's amazing. Like, if we use a month as a standard, fucking a week is great. So kudos to Monroe County, Indiana, and fuck you to Dallas. I guess is what I'm saying, because goddamn Cowboys. Anyway, when you're running through a disaster recovery scenario, you want to try to identify how long it's going to take you. You do need to practice some of the aspects of your disaster recovery scenarios. Some of them you're not going to be able to test. You're not going to be able to test that production has completely fallen offline in the middle of a workday. That is not something that you can necessarily test. And so you can't plan for certain things like bandwidth limitations due to customers connecting constantly, or DDoS from customers attempting to connect their software to your servers. You're not going to be able to identify these things in a live. You're not going to be able to test these things in a live scenario. You're only going to have to be able to do them theoretically. But some of the other things you can test are things like how long will it take to recover a server? How long will it take to recover 10 servers? How long will it take to recover 100 servers? You can test these things, or you should be able to test these things before they become a question. Another thing you need to test is how viable are your backups. You need to make sure that your backups are tested. Now, there are backup products that will sit there and test the validity of a backup by powering it on and making sure that it boots into the operating system. And these are things that do need to happen. You need to make sure these things are done. But if you don't have one of those products, then you need to do it manually. And all of these things will help you identify in a disaster before it becomes a problem. And it will help you be able to craft a recovery plan that can help identify, or that can help you in a panic state. Because let's face it, if you're in the middle of a crisis and you are just slammed with work and people questioning and things not going right, you are not going to be necessarily thinking about the best way to implement a specific solution. But if you've done that work beforehand, it will save you the heartache and pain and possibly a ton of sleep. So, what I'm trying to say is, if you plan for death, you might sleep just a little bit better. Alright guys, I hope you have a great day.